On a quiet day in March 2022, behind a small diner in Albuquerque, New Mexico, the life of a teenager was cut short in an explosion of violence. His name was Josue Ruiz, known to friends and family as Jay. Just 16 years old, he had dreams, a girlfriend, and a future ahead of him. But his story ended with bullets in a back alley, a desperate cover-up, and a mother willing to sacrifice her own son to avoid the consequences. This is the disturbing case of Josue J. Ruiz. Welcome to Crime and Consequence. At just 16 years old, Josue J. Ruiz was like so many teenagers, full of energy, humor, and dreams for the future. Jay was already learning responsibility. He had taken a job as a dishwasher at Lindy's Diner, a small but busy restaurant in downtown Albuquerque. Friends described him as funny, adventurous, and fiercely loyal, the type of kid who could light up a room with a joke or stand up for someone when they needed it. He had that mix of confidence and recklessness that often defines youth, always eager to test boundaries and imagine a bigger life ahead. Jay's world revolved around his relationship with Roxanne Ortiz, a girl he cared for deeply. Like many first loves, theirs was intense and filled with plans, late-night conversations about what the future might hold, talks about escaping the difficulties of home life, and dreams of building something together once they were old enough. For Jay, Roxanne wasn't just a girlfriend, she was his anchor, his partner, and the person he saw standing beside him as he grew into adulthood. But that relationship wasn't embraced by everyone. Roxanne's family disapproved, and their disapproval wasn't quiet. The person most vocal about it was her mother, Elizabeth Ortiz Chavez. Elizabeth was described by those who knew her as controlling, manipulative, and volatile. She didn't trust Jay. To her, he wasn't the right kind of boy for her daughter, and she made that opinion clear. But her behavior went beyond simple disapproval. She inserted herself into her children's relationships and decisions in a way that blurred the lines between parenting and domination. To Jay and Roxanne, this disapproval was just another obstacle in the way of young love. They thought they could weather it, that love would be enough. But what they couldn't see was that Elizabeth's resentment was festering into something dangerous. What began as controlling behavior would escalate, step by step, into a decision that would change all of their lives forever. It was a cool March night in Albuquerque, New Mexico. To anyone driving by, the streets looked quiet, the kind of night where nothing unusual should have happened. But behind a local diner, something sinister was already in motion. 16-year-old Josue J. Ruiz thought he was meeting up to settle things. Investigators later revealed that this wasn't a chance encounter, it was a setup. The confrontation had been orchestrated by Angelo Baldonado, Roxanne's younger brother, who was also just 16. Whether it was jealousy, pressure from his mother, or a twisted family loyalty, Angelo lured Jay into the alley with the promise of a one-on-one fight. But what happened next was not a fistfight. Almost as soon as Jay arrived, the confrontation turned deadly. Gunshots split the night air, echoing down the alley. Witnesses later described hearing multiple shots in rapid succession. Jay collapsed to the ground, mortally wounded, his life draining away in seconds. When first responders arrived, they found Jay lying on the cold pavement, bleeding heavily. They tried, but there was nothing they could do. At just 16, Josue Ruiz was pronounced dead at the scene. The crime stunned the community. This wasn't a random act of gang violence or a robbery gone wrong. This was a teenager killed in a dispute that should never have escalated so far. And as police began interviewing witnesses and piecing together what had happened, a disturbing truth started to surface. The fight had not been spontaneous. The shooting wasn't just Angelo's doing. Jay had walked straight into a trap that had been set in motion by Roxanne's own mother, Elizabeth Ortiz Chavez. When the first questions came, Elizabeth Ortiz Chavez didn't hesitate. She already had a story prepared. Standing outside the diner as her daughter cried and neighbors whispered, she told officers that her 16-year-old son, Angelo Baldonado, had been the one who pulled the trigger. She insisted it was nothing more than a teenage fight gone too far. According to her, Jay and Angelo had clashed, tempers had flared, and in the heat of the moment her son had fired. She painted herself as the horrified mother, trying to clean up after a mistake no parent should ever have to explain. But behind closed doors, Elizabeth's desperation was even darker. Detectives later learned that she had pressured Angelo privately, drilling into him that he needed to take responsibility. Her reasoning was cold and calculated, because Angelo was a juvenile, he would likely face a lighter sentence. Juvenile detention until 21 was, in her mind, a bearable sacrifice if it meant that she, the adult who actually pulled the trigger, could walk free. For a time, Angelo went along with the plan. He repeated his mother's version of events, telling investigators that he was the shooter. But detectives are trained to notice the cracks. The ballistics didn't match his story, the timeline didn't fit, and most importantly, Angelo's behavior betrayed him. He was restless, fidgeting, and visibly carrying the weight of a lie too big for his young shoulders. The turning point came under the pressure of a detailed interrogation. Faced with mounting evidence and unable to keep up the lie, Angelo finally broke down. His words stunned investigators. "It wasn't me. It was my mom." In that moment, the story Elizabeth had tried so hard to control unraveled completely. The fight was never just between two teenagers. The shooter wasn't a hot-headed boy. It was his own mother, the same woman who had not only taken the life of Josue J. Ruiz, but who had also tried to sacrifice her own child in order to save herself. For detectives, the case was no longer just about murder. It had become a chilling portrait of manipulation, betrayal, and maternal corruption, a mother willing to destroy both her children's futures to cover her crime. Once the scene behind the diner was secured, forensic teams got to work. Blood spatter, shell casings, and the victim's position told a clear story. This was not a scuffle between teenagers. This was a deliberate act of violence. Ballistics testing became one of the most damning pieces of evidence. The bullets recovered from Jay's body and the shell casings at the scene matched a handgun connected to Elizabeth. It was physical proof that contradicted her entire claim. Angelo couldn't have been the shooter, because the weapon trail pointed directly back to his mother. But it wasn't just science that built the case. Witnesses had seen Elizabeth that night. Some described her hovering near the confrontation, others said she had been the one escalating the tension. Even in the chaos, multiple accounts placed her exactly where investigators suspected she had been all along, not watching from a distance, but actively involved. Then came the final piece, Angelo's confession. Once the pressure of maintaining his mother's lie became unbearable, he admitted the truth, that Elizabeth had pulled the trigger. His words not only confirmed what detectives already suspected, but also revealed the depth of his mother's manipulation. Elizabeth Ortiz Chavez hadn't just killed a 16-year-old boy. She had immediately tried to rewrite reality, coercing her own son into shouldering the blame. It was a twisted plan that could have ruined his life forever, sentencing him to years in detention for a crime he never committed. For investigators, the picture was now undeniable. The forensic evidence tied the gun to Elizabeth. The eyewitnesses placed her at the scene. The confession revealed her manipulation. Together, it painted Elizabeth as not only the killer of Josue J. Ruiz, but also a mother willing to sacrifice her own child to save herself. The case against her was no longer circumstantial. It was airtight. The wheels of justice turned slowly in the case of Josue J. Ruiz. Court dates were delayed, hearings were rescheduled, and for nearly 3 years, Jay's loved ones were forced to relive the pain of his death while waiting for accountability. At first, Elizabeth Ortiz Chavez stuck to her story. She denied pulling the trigger, repeated the claim that her son Angelo had done it, and painted herself as a grieving mother caught in a tragic accident. But prosecutors had built an ironclad case. With ballistics, eyewitnesses, and Angelo's own confession stacked against her, the lie could not hold. As trial loomed, Elizabeth finally broke. In early 2025, she changed her plea to guilty on the charge of second-degree murder. By doing so, she avoided a lengthy trial that would have paraded every gruesome detail before the jury. Still, the plea acknowledged the truth she had fought so hard to bury, that she, not her son, had killed 16-year-old Jay. Now, Elizabeth faces up to 18 years in prison. Her formal sentencing remains pending, but the guilty plea alone was a moment of relief for Jay's family, who had waited nearly 3 years for justice. And what of Angelo, the boy she tried to sacrifice? Prosecutors initially charged him as though he had been the shooter. But after the truth came out, his charges shifted. He ultimately pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit first-degree murder and felony assault. While he wasn't the one who pulled the trigger, he was still part of the plan that brought Jay to that alley. For that, the judge ordered that Angelo remain in juvenile detention until he turns 21. In the end, the courtroom told a story of devastation. A mother who murdered a teenager, then tried to ruin her own son's life. A son who, manipulated and pressured, became entangled in his mother's crime. And a victim, Josue J. Ruiz, who never got the chance to grow up, to live his dreams, or to escape the toxic web that ultimately ended his life. 2 futures destroyed. 1 life stolen. 1 family shattered beyond repair. For those who knew him, Josue J. Ruiz wasn't just a name and a headline. He was a 16-year-old with a contagious laugh, a big heart, and a future still waiting to unfold. Friends remembered his playful spirit, his loyalty, and his ability to make even the darkest days a little brighter. His family has spoken of the unbearable emptiness left behind, birthdays that will never be celebrated, dreams that will never be achieved, milestones he will never reach. At 16, Jay was still finding his way in life, still discovering who he wanted to become. But in an instant, jealousy, control, and violence stole all of that away. This case is more than just a crime story. It is a stark warning about the dangers of toxic relationships and the destructive power of manipulation. When control, fear, and dysfunction take root in a family, the consequences can ripple outward, consuming not just one life but many. If this story moved you, please like this video, subscribe for more true crime stories, and share it with others. Every share spreads awareness, and awareness can save lives. And if you or someone you know is living in fear or control, please remember, you are not alone. Justice may finally be underway for Jay, but the pain of his loss continues to echo through his family, his friends, and his community. By telling his story, by remembering his life, we keep his memory alive, and we shine a light on the silent battles others may still be facing. This is how we honor Josue J. Ruiz, not only by remembering the way his life was taken, but by ensuring his story helps others find the strength to survive.